Awesome. Okay, so here we go with styles. We're talking about period styles with this. We also have artists' individual styles. So then we would say the style of Praxiteles. So it would go by that artist's name. So we're talking about period styles, and so we're looking at how art culture changes over time in a particular area. And you read about that in the introduction, but now you're going to start applying it. And so we're going to be looking at 4 different styles in ancient Greece. And we're going to start with the geometric style. And the geometric style, so write down geometric style. Geometric style is made up of basic shapes more than anything else. So we're looking at this little tiny sculpture. It's less than 6 inches tall. Looks giant on the screen. It's made out of bronze from a lost wax casting method, and it's a horse. And I gotta tell you, the Greeks loved their horses. Really, only aristocrats could afford horses, and so it was a way for them to have social status. So they're breeding their horses. They're getting these really fine champion horses, and they're competing with each other. And they do things like name their daughters and sons, like Hippolytus, Hippocrates. They're naming them after horses. So that's kind of interesting. So you've got this little bronze horse right over here. And how detailed would you say it is?
It's very minimalistic.
Very minimalistic. Okay, it's made up of kind of just basic shapes. And that's where we get the title of this style, the geometric style. And so it's kind of like the head is made of a tube that's split at the bottom, kind of got a triangle shape here, kind of an ovalized triangle right here, simple tube shape down here, swelling right here, and then down into straight lines. Very simplistic. Now, remember I talked to you guys about the late Bronze Age collapse, right at the end of class. And the late Bronze Age collapse, we have all this kind of chaos happening with people on the move. And Mycenae and Tiryns and these other big Mycenaean sites basically get abandoned and people stop living there. And they really never lived there again, which is kind of interesting. They still have cities that are going to form around them later on. But right now, during the late Bronze Age collapse, there's not much happening. And in terms of art, they mainly make pottery. And the pottery they make, remember what we saw when we were in the Aegean, when we were looking at Minoan ceramics, and we saw the octopus, and it was so beautiful?
Mhm.
Yeah, we don't get anything like that. We get stripes. That's it. Stripes for hundreds of years. And if they have figures, they're making the figures, their sculptures, out of transitory material like wood or beeswax, and it's disappeared. So this is astonishing. They made a piece of permanent art, long-lasting art, out of just, wow, it's just there suddenly. So what's happening? Well, economically, things are calming down. It takes about 800 years. And during this time, we have the period where Homer, the blind Greek poet, was creating his accounts of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And so this is a time of kings. This is a time of people going on epic adventures, and it's the Bronze Age. But when we get to this period, with the geometric style, even though the horse is made out of bronze, all the tools, even the swords, are made out of iron. And so there was this sense that they had lost a little something with their technological innovation. I think like we sort of do when we think about social media and how it's consumed our lives. And how for many of us, this means that we're not actually going out to dinner with friends very often. We're not connecting with people very much. We've lost something. And the Greeks felt the same way. They felt they had lost the glory of heroic warrior culture in order to become farmers. with their plows made out of iron and their swords made out of iron. So, let's take a look. They start settling down. They start living in villages. They start making art. They start building temples to the gods and goddesses that aren't temporary things made out of mud brick, but start to last longer and longer. Some of them even surviving today. So we get this little sculpture right here. This is called the Manticlos Apollo. He's made in a geometric style. But one thing I want to warn you about with style, so I'd like you to write this in your notes, is that we often have this desire to like pinpoint things and say everything that belongs to this style is in a perfect square or perfect circle. And the reality is that the style changes a little bit on where exactly in Greece it is, and also as time passes, innovations occur. And so if we were to look at the Manticlos Apollo, we could see, wow, got the triangle chest all right, but look at the details on the chest compared to the horse. It's a lot. He has writing on his legs. That's why we know he's the Manticlos Apollo, because Manticlos was the person who commissioned him and offered him up as an offering to the god Apollo. He's not very big, 8 inches, a little bit bigger than the horse. We've got this nice detailed but stylized hair. We've got these big eyes. His face compared to the horse's face is just like worlds away from it. He's much more sophisticated. But fundamentally, we can say, okay, his legs are tubes or cylinders that have been come to points. His upper body is a triangle, and then he has these basic shoulders attached to it. His head is a triangle, etc. So you can see it still contains those geometric qualities. Now let's go ahead and look at the Dipylon crater. So this is from the geometric period as well. So Dipylon, you heard me talk about pylons when I was talking about ancient Egypt. At the very end of our lecture, we looked at 2 pylon gates. And those, remember, are these gates in Egypt to a temple complex that are shaped kind of like this. They're flat on the top, wider at the bottom. They're very stable. So the thing about all these Greeks during this period of the chaos following the Bronze Age collapse is that Greeks began to spread out, move around, like all these other peoples were as well. And they start colonizing parts of southern Italy, Sicily, which is now part of southern Italy, Egypt, and in fact, they take over the kingship in Egypt. Have y'all heard of Cleopatra?
Mm-hmm.
She's a Greek pharaoh. Her whole family was Greek, but they were also Egyptian. So they're spreading out, they're going to Turkey, they're taking over political control of islands. And it's not a particularly organized thing. It's just one of those things that seems to happen in this chaos as they spread out. But that means they're taking their gods with them, and they're also taking art styles with them. But they're also picking up art styles wherever they go. So we get to the pylons in Egypt. And basically, back in the city of Athens, which is a city-state, they needed to have a cemetery. And you'll want to make sure you don't bury your dead in the city. Does anybody have any thoughts on why it would be a bad idea to bury your dead in the city?
Because diseases can spread.
Diseases spread, and they spread in well water. And Greece is a pretty dry place. Most of the time people are getting their water from wells. And you don't want decaying human bodies with all the kind of bacteria and viruses in them getting into your drinking water. That would be very bad. So they make them have their cemetery on the lowlands outside the city so that it can't get into their water table. And the gates into the city were made of Egyptian-style pylons. There were 2 of them, just like in Egypt. And so in Greek, they said that's dipylon, so 2 pylons. So we've got the 2 pylons, and the pylons are saying, basically, now that you've passed in here, you are in the city. On the other side is the countryside and the cemetery. And this beautiful vase was being used as a grave marker. And this thing is 40 inches tall. It's huge. I mean, a lot of grave markers today are not 40 inches tall. And one thing I always like to think of with a grave marker like this is what would happen if it rains?
It collects the rainwater?
It's gonna collect the rainwater and then mosquitoes, right?
Yeah.
We live in Kentucky, we know about mosquitoes.
Mm.
Well, they wanted to prevent that, so they had a solution. First, they made the top of the pot on a potter's wheel. That's the big belly of it that would have held the wine. And then they made the lower part of it on the potter's wheel. And then they put the two together. Because it would have just been too big to make all at once. So they get it made, they fire it, and then they decorated it. But here's the thing, they didn't decorate it all at once. They decorated all of this, these lines, the handles, all of these lines down here and here. And then they just have it waiting for an aristocratic family to have a death in their family and need one of these craters. And then, according to the needs of the family, they're going to paint in the rest of the designs. So what we're going to focus on are these sections of the designs. Okay, so why does having that big vessel with a hole in it matter? They put the hole down here so that the water can drain out. But also, this is over the body of the dead person, and they can also offer wine this way to the dead. Now, in Greece, depending on your city-state, pretty much the concept of the afterlife is pretty vague. It's kind of foggy, it's gray, it's mysterious. And it's not clear that people are suffering, but it's not clear that they're not suffering. It's not a hell, it's not a heaven, it's just an afterlife that's vague. And of course, we all probably know about Hades taking control of the underworld. And so what we're seeing here are people making offerings to the dead, but also showing their social status and making sure that everybody knows they did the funeral right to honor their dead loved one. So what we have here is the funeral bier. So that's B-I-E-R. And that's like the place where the body is laid out for people to come and see the dead person one last time. And you can see he's lying on a table. And do you see how down by his feet, he's got two kids. One medium-sized kid and one tiny wee kid up there. Do you see it? And then right here, we see this figure sitting on a chair with a footstool. And they have a little kid on their lap. And they're pointing up here at what's happening. And then over here, we have another person. And this person has a hand out holding something above the head of this guy and another hand on top of their head. And if we look carefully, we can see that there are these little lines coming out here of this triangle of the body shape. It's a geometric style, right? Those are breasts. So we got women here, and if we look at these, we can see, okay, there's a whole bunch of women doing this. They are actually doing this. They are tearing their hair out. And they are wailing. And they are honoring the dead man and making sure the funeral is done right. Now, probably there aren't enough women from an aristocratic family to be able to have only the members of their family do that. So they're going to have to hire them. And we know they did that because the Athenians wrote a law that they passed that said it is inappropriate for people to hire poor women to come and tear their hair at funerals. And everybody ignored that law because there was a proper way to mourn the dead and there was an improper way to mourn the dead. So what if you get fined? You're an aristocratic family. You just accept the fine. Okay, so I want you to notice down here we have what look like goats. They got the horns sticking out. And then we have ducks or geese under the table. So this is the actual funeral process of the women mourning the dead. And we come down here, and here are the men of this kind of whole group. So these aristocratic families would have been in charge of districts in the city of Athens. Each one would have a district, and so basically you're looking at citizens, some poor, some not so poor, some wealthy, from these districts, and how they are properly mourning their lord at his death. And so we've got over here, we've got horses with a chariot. We can see it a little bit more clearly. So if you're in the far back, I want you guys to look up for a minute in the back and look at this horse, this chariot. So they've kind of condensed everything down. They're not concerned about naturalism. They just want you to be able to count. So we can see we've got 3 heads to make horses. So 3 heads equals 3 horses. We count the legs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They've got 6 legs in the front, and we do the same thing in the back. They've got 6 legs. So we know 3 horses are pulling this chariot. And here's this man, and in case we're not sure he's a man, they give us a penis. Just to be sure. We see this guy right behind him. This might be a little weird to look at, but this is a man, and his whole body is basically made up of his shield.
Mm.
And then he's got his spears. And then you have more guys with shields as they go on along, and more of the chariot. And so it's a military parade honoring the dead man. Now this is going to be taken and placed over his body, above the ground, of course. And that's where it was found many, many, many generations later. So we're looking at something that's showing the economics of a proper funeral at this time. And we can see that economically they're doing a lot better during this geometric era than before, during that period of the Bronze Age collapse and its recovery. All right, so ceramic production is going to become big business. We already saw these elaborate, huge ceramic jars that were made in not Mycenae, but in Minoan society. And now what we've got is the development of even greater trade. As everything settles down and the economy starts to move in this region, everybody's doing better as the economy is burgeoning. And that means people can afford some nice stuff. You know, the larger TV instead of the small TV. And what they're gonna get are ceramics. And so you can get elaborately painted ceramics. And basically trade wars start breaking out over these ceramics. And how do they do that? Well, they steal each other's ideas. So you may have heard that sometimes places like Israel or even China have basically spied on American industry and taken kind of information about technology that's supposed to be private, and they've used it to boost their own factories and production. Well, something similar was happening in this era. And so over there on what we call the Levant, which is Palestine, Israel, and Syria, and Lebanon today, they were making really elaborate pots in multiple colors. And they were charging a lot of money for it. Like they're like iPhones and MacBooks. And then all of a sudden, over here in Greece, this city-state called Corinth, the potters there get some of these jars and they say, hey, we could do that, and we can make it cheaper. And so they do, and so basically trade wars break out over ceramics. So this is what they're doing. They're copying their neighbors, their competitors, and they're changing. But they want people to buy it, and everybody's used to buying it from the Levant. And in the Levant, that's where we would find sphinxes, right? Can you guys see the sphinx? She appears twice. She doesn't look like an Egyptian sphinx.
Oh, I see. One.
So we have her right here,
Mhm.
and we have her right here. So it's got a woman's head with an eagle's body. Here you see her again. Okay, we've got the visual. We've got lions. We've got cattle. We've got great boars. We've got swans. and they're all parading around here. Now, one of their innovations that they did was that they actually put a kind of slip. Remember, a slip is that very liquidy color that's made out of clay that you can put on a ceramic before you fire it. And it's gonna make it smoother, nicer, and give you often a different color. So they put this cream color over the red clay. And then on top of that, they're gonna paint it with other slip that is either black or red. Now remember, none of these colors are true when they're painting them on. These are the colors that come out once you fired it in the kiln. It's a really hard thing to understand unless you've done ceramics. It's incredibly frustrating. You're like, this looks like a really nice pink. Oh, it's green. Wow. So if you guys do take a ceramics class, read the labels carefully on the glazes. Okay, so they do that, and then they come back and they use this really sharp burin, pointed needle-like thing, to scrape off the red and the brown to make the designs. So you see the cream color poking through. Now that looks to me like an incredibly intense amount of work you have to do. But they were undercutting their competitors. But don't worry, not too long after that, Athens is going to undercut Corinth with their even cheaper, beautiful ceramics. So, where are the registers?
Is it like the red stripes? Oh no, that's a ground line.
No.
Right. I was right.
Registers always have ground lines.
Okay, yay.
So all of these are registers.
Okay.
Except here.
Yes.
Just checking to see if you guys remember. Okay, so that is it for this kind of geometric style and then its transformation into this kind of starting to become archaic style. Okay, so here's the Koros figure, and I know a lot of you were sitting there going, oh my gosh, Kore, Koros, Kritios, and Kroisos. What? So let's start with Koros. And Koros, K-O-U-R-O-S, means young man. And that is seen in a series of sculptures that were offered up at temples in honor of dead warriors. So Koros figures are always male, they're always nude, and they're always a dead member of an aristocratic family. A young one. And so we see that here with this figure. And remember, we've not too long before this moved out of the geometric style. And so we still have abstracted, simplified forms, but they're beginning to pay attention to like that wrinkle of tissue and skin over your knees. The details of muscles on the leg, they're not quite accurate, but they're really getting there. Look, we're seeing the development of the groin and the skin along the groin right here. Notice that this isn't fully freely carved in 3 dimensions. It's still got the hands attached. So we can say it's abstract. And when we get up to the abstraction of the hair, we can see that in some ways it's kind of like the Manticlos Apollo with his rings of hair. It's stylized, it's abstract, it repeats over and over again in a pattern. They're not trying to get into the complexity of hair and curls because you know what? That's hard. He's got big eyes. His head fell off, by the way. So a lot of these sculptures that we're looking at in ancient Greece, they were at temples that got sacked in wars. And they're broken because they got knocked over. And then, rather than just throw them out or turn them into something else, because they had a sacred quality to them, they buried them at the temples. And so that means that sometimes we got a head that came off, hands, arms come off when the figures get knocked over in battle. Okay, so we got the really big eyes. The eyes are totally stylized. Now, the next thing I want you to notice, I want everybody to stand up for a minute.
It's the pharaoh pose.
It's the pharaoh pose. We're gonna do the pharaoh pose again. Okay, so the pharaoh pose. Look straight ahead. Arms down in fists at your side. Left foot forward. Now most of you want to balance your weight reasonably across both feet, but you're gonna put your weight back. Okay, now you're in the pharaoh and Akiro pose, and that's what these Koros figures are. So what we're gonna be looking, you can sit down now. You can feel how that felt kind of weird. And like you couldn't really move because your weight's on the back leg. Like what? That's gonna be so hard. We're going from this Egyptian motif to increasing naturalism over time until we finally get to a point where they don't make them anymore because they've transformed what they do, both in the practice of how they commemorate their young aristocrats and also in the fashion of the art. And so at that point, we will have changed styles again. So we're looking at a style here called the archaic style. So style number one, the oldest one in ancient Greece, is geometric. Style number two is the archaic style. And it's stylized, it's patterned, it's abstract, it bases itself on the pharaonic Egyptian pose. And remember the close contact that Greeks had with ancient Egypt, going back to Mycenae, where we saw the gold death mask, and we have this tomb that's buried under the ground that's like the tombs of pharaohs at that time. Because remember, they didn't have obvious burial chambers that look like pyramids anymore because they got stolen. So everything's kind of buried and hidden under the ground, and that's what we had in Mycenae. And that appreciation of Egyptian culture can persist all the way to here, to the archaic age. Okay, so then, if we have Koros or young man for these nude male figures, we have Kore for these young female figures. And they're kind of the same thing. They're women who belong to an aristocratic family who have died, not in war, but unexpectedly. And we can't say for sure that all the male figures died in war, but some of them have markings on them, have writing on them that tell us that this guy fell in battle. And one of the inscriptions we have from one of the Kore figures, the female figures, is for a young woman who died before she got married. So this one is actually, she's called the Lady of Auxerre, which by the way is a French town. And she was found in the basement of the local museum in the early 20th century, like around 1900. And there was no record of where she came from, who gave it to the museum or whatever. And that happens a lot. Anytime someone digs up an artifact and it's not processed through archaeological analysis and discovery, a lot of information that might have helped us understand it disappears. And so she's just out there. She looks like a Kore figure. She's little, and that's what we got. We don't know where exactly she came from in Greece. Now she's doing something with her hand, and that's going to be important because where the men are standing like this, she's doing something. And the female figures are often doing something with a hand. So hers is reaching up to her chest. Her hair is
Long.
it's long, but it's like the way that they depicted it on the Koros figures. It's patterned and abstracted. She has her 2 feet together closely to balance, and this hand is just totally flat as it goes down by her side. Her eyes are a little bit more naturalistic, but they're still pretty stylized. And of course you can see that she fell on her face and broke away part of her face. And we can see stuff about her clothes, including that there are these nested squares making the design of her skirt, and this big belt that holds it all together. Okay, other sculpted offerings found at temples. A lot of them were found at the temple for Athena, or near the temple of Athena in Athens on the Acropolis, because they had a big war there. that caused a lot of the breakage. But anyway, let's look at this guy. So notice he's not naked and he's a guy. Got a beard. Did any of the Koros figures have beards? No, they're young men. He's a mature man. And as a mature man, he's got the beard. And he's got the calf on his shoulder. Isn't it cute?
Yeah.
He's called the calf bearer. And I used to love this right up until I found out what it was used for, what it's commemorating. He commissions this as a commemoration of when he brings this calf to be sacrificed to Athena.
Oh.
And so whenever in Greece and Rome they were sacrificing animals to the gods, the animals had to consent. And so if you just try to lead it up, the chances are that it will try to balk. It doesn't want to go somewhere away from the herd. And it would be indicating that it is not consenting to take a message to the god or goddess. So you couldn't sacrifice that day. So he's got a small enough calf that he can carry it, probably 110 pounds, up there on his shoulders. And he's holding it so it can't wriggle and show that it doesn't want to be sacrificed. And there's a priest there who's going to assess, did it want to be a sacrifice? Did it want to carry a message to the gods? So he succeeds at this, and he honors that moment with paying for this sculpture. And I want you to notice, check out the muscles on his arm there. It's getting a little bit more naturalistic. His eyes are still really big. His hair's still stylized. His face is stylized. The naturalism in the calf's hip, really pretty high. And so we're seeing that movement in the archaic towards more and more naturalism. But I do want you to check out his belly button, because his belly button is a perfect circle with a perfect circular ring around it. And then we get to this guy, and this is Croesus, and Croesus has basically an epitaph at the bottom that he's standing on. It says, "Alas, poor Croesus, cut down in the front lines of battle by mad Ares, god of war." He's a Koros figure. He's naked. What do you think about his naturalism? Also, would you say he's buff or not buff?
He's pretty buff.
He's really buff. Yeah. And so when we look at his shins, we can see actually the calf muscle is unique now. It's its own. You can see muscles right there that are unique from just the line that we saw on the earlier Koros figure. I want you to notice his hands and the shaping of his thumbs and his knuckles, more naturalistic. We can see individual muscles now in his upper leg. The same is true here on his body. And we can see that he's got these cheeks. He has something else. What do you notice about his eyes? Do they look similar to the other Koros figure, or do they look different?
They look different.
They look like they're bulging out a little bit.
They are bulging out a little bit. Then check out his mouth.
It's kind of like a slight smile to
He's
it.
got a slight smile. This is what we call the archaic smile. And the archaic smile doesn't start right away, but when it comes, it seems to be an indication that this person once thought. This was a thinking person. And notice his hair. Check out his hair over there. Have we seen anything like that yet? It's still stylized. It's still patterned, but it's becoming more naturalistic. So you can see there's cultural pressure to make more and more naturalistic sculpture. We're going to look at this other lovely Kore figure. And you can see that her arm is broken off right here, and she was probably holding something in her hand, an offering. And we can see that she was painted. Check out this lovely kind of reddish paint in her hair, her face. She's called the peplos Kore. This garment that she's wearing on her top is a peplos. And it's basically two pieces of cloth that meet at the shoulders and are pinned together to make the top. Her hair is also becoming a little bit more elaborate, still stylized, still patterned. And what do you see on her face?
Archaic smile.
Got the archaic smile. Check this one out. She's relatively late, 520 to 510 BCE. And check out her clothes. She is quite fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we think about, we've already talked about this a lot, is look at all of her drapery. All of the wrinkles and folds in it, all the colors, all the ruffles. All of that took a considerable amount of time and therefore money to make her. And look, she's painted as well. And she's got
Archaic smile.
the archaic smile. Okay, so here we are with the temple up there. We're going to be looking at architecture. And so during this time, kind of in the geometric period, they're making their temples, their little temples, and they're made out of clay, and they don't necessarily have thatched roof or they have stone roofs, like slate, so they don't last a long time. But somewhere along the way, they start to make temples that are made out of limestone and marble. Limestone and marble are closely related. They're like different phases of stone. And they happen to have a lot of deposits of this. So in the back, if you're using your phone, would you put it away, please? If you need to use your phone, remember you can step out of the class at any time and do that. But if you're just getting distracted, that's not going to help you succeed in this class. And I want everybody to pass it, because you know what? I hate putting F's on people's transcripts. But if you're not present for this class, you're not going to get this information. So stay with me. Okay, so we've got these temples that they're starting to make out of this stone. And this stone is going to last so long compared to the mud brick that they've been using before. And they're going to take it several steps farther. They're going to say, hey, let's make it really big. So what's kind of weird is, remember how I told you the Greeks spread out and they go to Italy? Some of the best preserved temples, the oldest preserved temples, are in Italy and not in Greece. And so that's what we've got here. This is the Temple of Hera II at Paestum, Italy. It's about 50 to 60 years after that sculpture we just saw of that really elaborately decorated core. And we are looking at a style of temple called the Doric temple. And so this is the earliest stone temple that the Greeks were making, this kind. And the Doric temples have these columns that are huge. The columns almost block your view into the building. And these columns sit flat on the floor. They don't have a little stand to sit on. Later columns are going to have a cute little decorative ring or square to sit on. These just sit straight on the floor. And I want you to know that notice that the floor here makes this platform that has little steps going up. But nowhere when you look at this temple can you say, this is where we enter the temple. Because you don't. So they don't need to say, oh, by the way, you go this way, because they're not talking to the general public about going in. It's just like Egypt, you're not going to go in. Okay, so the next thing to notice is they have these round circular parts up at the top, and then they have these stripes going down them, and those are incised. And they're lovely, beautiful, and very heavy. And so to move them into place, they cut them into pieces and stack them with a piece of iron in the middle to hold them together. So you remember that kid's toy that probably you had that's a series of rings that you stick on a little kind of cone shape?
Mm-hmm.
They made these the same way.
Oh, cool.
But they're still really heavy and hard to move in. So with this Doric temple style, we have this whole area up here, and this area is often called the frieze, F-R-I-E-Z-E. And here on a Doric temple, you are going to have these 3 vertical stripes going down. And you're gonna get one over a column and right in between 2 columns. So they measure it out so it matches up perfectly. And on they go around the whole building. And they don't have any other decorations up there. So Doric temples, not a lot of decoration, just the columns, just the 3 lines. So the 3 lines are called the triglyphs, and the space in between each set of 3 lines is called the metope. So they're triglyphs and metopes as they go around. And then we have this triangular shape up here for the roof, and that is where they're gonna put sculptures, and we call that the pediment. So write pediment down. Okay, and now we're gonna look at how different and similar Doric and Ionic orders are. So the Doric order is happening kind of in Eastern and Central, no, not Eastern, Western and Central Greece. And the Ionic orders are being used primarily in Athens, in Eastern Greece, and then in the islands between Athens and Turkey. And so they're gonna have, this frieze is a little shallower. They're gonna have more decorations here. Do you see these little kind of rectangular shapes here?
Mhm.
See my teeth?
Hmm?
The name for them in Greek is dentil, and you can imagine that dent is for tooth. So they got little teeth. Now, when you leave campus today, if you walk out past the library and you see the row of 19th century brick buildings, and you look up at the roof, you can see that they made them in a Greek style, and they put dentils on them. The Ionic one has no triglyphs and metopes. It leaves this blank, and they often fill it with relief sculpture. They have a pediment up there, and just like over here, they can put sculptures up there. The big difference is that this is thinner than the Doric columns. It has a fancy pedestal, and it has a fancy top or capital. So we call the top of a column that's decorative a capital. And it's got these spirals on it. And those spirals are associated with ferns unfolding. Okay, so now we're going to look at the temple of Hera 1. So this is a slightly different temple than the one we were looking at back here. This is Hera 2. They're very close to each other. Hera 2 is put back together more than Hera 1. And if we look, we can see we've got columns going all the way around the temple. And they're freestanding columns, so that means they're not attached to the wall anywhere. And we can go around and we can say, okay, so this is the actual kind of room space of the architecture. And the entrance must be up here. Notice we've got 3 columns that line up with the columns on the outside. They cared about that. That was important to them. And if we look inside this, we can see that if we're looking in here, we can only look on the sides. And down the middle, they have another row of columns lined up perfectly over there and over here to support the top of the roof and keep it from collapsing down. But also, notice this structure right here?
Mhm.
This is where they have the cult statue. So the cult statue is the religious statue of Hera that would have been there. So if you were to peek into the building, it would be really hard to see her. And that's okay. You weren't supposed to be peeking into the building. You were supposed to come up outside and communicate with priests and priestesses outside. They're the ones who get to go inside. The other thing I want you to notice is we have this kind of front area. Then we have the room where the cult statue is, and we're going to give that a name. The Greeks called it the naos, N-A-O-S. And the naos came in Italy to be called a cella, C-E-L-L-A. Naos in Greek means ship. So it was like the inside, they said, of a ship. Okay, and then we have this room back here, and this room's completely closed off except these entrances right there. And this room's like a storage area. And you can see that it's put on the cardinal points. North, south, east, and west. Okay, this is almost like a little temple, but it's not quite. So one of the sacred temple sites in ancient Greece is Delphi. How many of you have heard of Delphi? Delphi is really important, and it's important because the god Apollo does battle with Gaia, kind of Mother Nature, and wins and kills her snake, the python. Meanwhile, he then gets a new python himself, so then he's got a python. Remember back when we were talking about Minoan culture and snakes and stuff like that? Well, okay, so here, Delphi is up in the mountains, and it happens to be right over a series of fault lines. And these fault lines, because remember, the African plate is subducting under the European plate, and it's causing all this chaos. It's causing hydrocarbons to seep up out of the soil, out of the cracks in the rock, thousands of feet below. And some of those hydrocarbons are very, very toxic. As in, if you breathe them in enough concentration, you will die. And there is a temple to Apollo in Turkey that has big iron gates on it to try to keep people and animals out. And scattered all around inside the gates are sparrows and other birds that come down to settle there and are overcome with the gases and they die. But here at Delphi, they had a different kind of hydrocarbon, and that seems to be ethylene was the main gas that was coming up. And ethylene was one of the first gases used in the early 20th century to anesthetize people in order to do surgery on them. And ethylene is what we use in grocery stores today, because in your grocery store, you want to go and buy lemons, or you want to buy limes or oranges. They're all green. They're all a nice green color. And they expose them in a chamber to ethylene gas, and they turn to the colors they're supposed to be. And I know this because I was there on Parent Day when a Kroger dad came to Parent Day at my kids' grammar school and explained how they do this, so. Okay, so anyway, here at Delphi, people are going up there to ask the Pythia, and the Pythia are these priestesses, in a sense, who, one of them, once a month, will be invited by the priest to go into this little room underneath the temple. And it's got a really low roof. And she's gonna sit on a tripod, which is kind of high. And she's gonna have a little bowl of water, an open kind of rounded bowl of water. And she's gonna be in this room in the dark, and she's gonna be looking at the water, and there's a priest outside the door, and she's inhaling these hydrocarbon gases because a crack in the earth went right under that corner of the temple. And then she's receiving her visions so that she can prophesy. Lots and lots of people from across Greece and other parts of the world traveled to see if the Pythia would take their cases and see what the best solution for something was. And so almost every city-state of any significance in Greece has a temple that's not a temple. It's called a treasury, and it's like a little tiny cute temple, but it holds the wealth of the city. And it's protected by Apollo, as well as the priests at the site. And so this is called the Siphaean treasury from the Siphaeans, so the city-state of Siphaea. And you can see that it looks like a cute little temple, except we have solid sides, and instead of columns in front, look what they've done.
Statues.
They've got statues of women, and statues of women as columns are called caryatids. So write that down. Caryatids. They're both holding out like a golden apple. And then we have this decorative painted relief frieze around the frieze in the middle top, and then we have the pedamental sculptures, and then we have the acrotery, which are the sculptures on top. And notice the colors. I know you probably thought all of these temples were white and all the sculptures were white, but they painted them all. It's just that the paint washed off. All right, so now we're looking at the Temple of Artemis on the island of Corfu. And what we have here is the West pediment. I want you to notice we've got lions. We've got men in battle, crushed down to fit in the corners, and look at this figure right here. This is Medusa. Look at her big eyes. Still all in the archaic style. And here's the painted version of what she looked like. I love the Sphinx for her hair. I love the curls. That's really nice. And her fangs, her snake fangs. So she is there to do something, make people be appropriate in this zone. Instead of maybe attacking the temple or ransacking it, they're supposed to treat it with caution. So she's there warning them. Don't do anything bad, or bad things will happen to you. Okay, so now we are looking at the Temple of Aphaia. You can see earthquakes have taken their toll. And what kind of columns do we have in this one? Are they ionic?
They're
Yeah,
Doric.
they're Doric.
They're Doric. What's the difference between Doric and Ionic?
Thinner.
Ionic
has some
smaller.
spirals.
Ionic has the spirals. Doric just has round up there. Okay. So, and do we have a frieze or do we have metaphyes and triglyphs?
And triglyphs.
Metaphyes and triglyphs are always on Doric buildings. Okay, so we got this Doric temple, and we look here, we see the reconstruction of it from 1828, and we can see, wow, the main building inside, the main rooms are painted red. That is awesome. And we see we have a battle happening up there. Details of the battle, and I want you to notice we have wounded figures on the corners. They're collapsed, they're dying. And this is the goddess in the middle. And up there is the acrotiri. You don't need to know the word acrotiri, just people ask me, what are those? And they're called acrotiri. All right, so we get this guy. And he's from about 490. And he's got the archaic smile, he's got the archaic style hair. But look at his body. We got even more naturalism than we did on Croesus. And he's had like a spear or an arrow go into his chest, and yeah, that's a fatal wound. He's not gonna live for that. And he's broken off his toes because he fell off the pediment. And that happened to a lot of pedimental sculptures, so they're kind of broken. So his toes are broken here, but notice that he kind of sticks his foot out, almost like he could fall off the pediment, like he's dying. So they're trying to like drum up the drama a little bit, but it's still very much in the archaic style. Does he look like he cares that he's dying?
No, he's
Not
smiling.
really. Does he seem to have an awareness that I'm dying?
I don't know.
Not particularly. But let's look at this. This guy is about 20 years later. It took him a while to finish making the sculptures on his temple. He's falling off the temple pediment even more than the other guy. He is trying to pull an arrow out of his chest. He's gonna die too. His lung is collapsing. He's only managing to hold himself up as he falls because his arm is caught in a shield. But in a moment, we know he's gonna fall. So the artists sculpting this are making us have an emotional connection. Look at him in the way he's hanging on to that shield and how in just a moment he's gonna roll off the pediment. And already it's making us concentrate on his death. And instead of looking us right in the eye, like, everything's okay, I'm fine. He still has the archaic smile, but he looks down, acknowledging his death. This is the point of transition where we go from the archaic to the classical style. I like to call them Warrior A and Warrior B. Warrior B is the one who seems to embrace his death. He knows it's coming. Warrior A is kind of oblivious. And this is the end of the archaic style. And since we have 2 minutes, I'm gonna let you go. We'll pick up next time with the Quidio School, and the last of our Quorum speakers